I may have mentioned this point before about whether the biases in the models, for example, we said the models, global models, tend to typically have a dry bias on land, so they put less rain on land, and typically that means they are putting a little bit more rain on the ocean. So if you look at the monsoon circulation, this problem exists. And the point I was trying to make before was that there is a tendency to increase the model resolution and hope for better results. But the other question is whether improving the feedbacks between soil moisture and the atmosphere, vegetation as a moisture capacitor, and the atmosphere can improve the results instead of just the brute forced increased resolution. Of course, increased resolution helps better representation of the orography, which you expect will improve the rainfall and so on, but then regional downscaling with high resolution tends to show that orographic effect tends to get exaggerated, and regional downscaling can produce too much orographic rain. This has to be, of course, compared with global high resolution runs with similar resolutions. But anyways, I found this paper by Pankaj Kumar's group from ICER Bhopal, I think. He took the Cortex domain, which is this one, and the rainfall regions are identified here, and he's using a coupled regional Earth system model, which means the land, ocean, and the atmosphere are coupled, and it probably has some vegetation representation, carbon cycle, and so on. Typically, when we say Earth system model, we have carbon cycle represented. But without going into those sorts of details, I just wanted to show some results from this paper. So the question I'm asking here again, is the chronic dry bias in global models related to resolution or land, atmosphere, vegetation type feedbacks? One of the regional models this paper compares from the so-called Cortex experiments. The IPCC does global assessment reports with CMIP models. So CMIP 6 is released now, for example, but they also have a project called Cortex, Coordinated Regional Downscaling Experiments, where the historic simulations and the future projections from the CMIP 6 suite of models are downscaled with various models for several regions of the world, and one of the regions is this monsoon domain. And this is useful because this is large enough to capture some of the features like monsoon interseasonal oscillations, which of course have a close relation with the northwestern tropical Pacific, which is here, which is going to be represented through boundary conditions, because these kind of downscalings impose boundary conditions from global models. And one of the messages from the Cortex monsoon before, from Subimal Ghosh's group, was that some of the Cortex models actually degrade the global simulations because many of the Cortex models are run as sea surface temperature forced models, and they are not coupled to the ocean. They are not climate models, they are regional atmospheric models. That can be a problem because the monsoon is very much a closely coupled ocean atmosphere process as well as land processes. Okay, so this regional model here does not have the coupling like the results we're going to look at next. So this does produce this dry bias over the core monsoon zone, and also underrepresents the rainfall. So the negative numbers here are drier than the IMD rainfall product for the period of study that's being compared here. So there are some excess rainfall regions, so the downstream of the orography of the Western Ghats, excess rainfall is produced, and some complicated patterns here, but in general here the rainfall is underestimated, and so on. But to quickly jump to the regional Earth system model, what this group did is to actually compare a higher resolution Earth system model in the regional configuration, so at 0.11 degree resolution and 0.22 degree resolution, comparing rainfall with IMD as well as with the model to each other. So you can see here that in the coarser resolution model here 0.22, compared to IMD, the model is producing too much rainfall over the core monsoon zone and in the downstream leeward side of the orography. This is what we mean by excess orographic rain, and whether that's affecting this region as opposed to the drier bias here, it's not clear, but nonetheless, improving the resolution here greatly reduces the wet bias. Okay, so the higher resolution version here has reduced both this excess rainfall as well as this excess rainfall, and you can see there is a great reduction of this rainfall and a significant reduction of this excess rainfall as well. So this doesn't exactly answer the question of orographic impacts versus land feedbacks, vegetation feedbacks, and so on. But this gives you an idea that this model may be perfect for exploring those sorts of questions. So why is this related to the extremes that we are talking about here? Basically, remember that we said extremes are very much focused on the active and break periods, the intraseasonal timescales, other than the daily rainfall, of course. So if this regional configuration of the Earth system model or the regional Earth system model improves the monsoon intraseasonal oscillations, which are closely related to the active break periods, then we expect that this will also impact the extreme rainfall. So just for that reason, I'm including this podcast and this paper here. So this CCAM model here compared to TRIM, which is a satellite product for rainfall, obviously shows a poorer depiction of the monsoon intraseasonal oscillation as shown here, going from the deep tropical region where the mesos originate in the marine ITCZ, propagating northward, and the zero lead here is where the rainfall on land is at its maximum. So you have the dry period and the wet period and so on. So those are related to the mesos. So you can see that the meso representation is poor in the CCAM model, which had a huge dry bias in the core monsoon zone and the orographic part of the Western Ghats. But when you look at the high resolution regional Earth system model and the low resolution, both are doing better than CCAM, for example, but the high resolution is quite close to the TRIM observation-based monsoon intraseasonal oscillations, which means it is most likely doing an improved rendition of the extreme rainfalls as well. Okay, like the active period, more intense rainfall, hopefully with shorter active periods with warming, but this is just comparing climatological simulations. Nonetheless, you can also look at convective rainfall in the high and low resolution version and the large scale rainfall. So this is more like dividing the rainfall, monsoon rainfall, into large scale stratiform kind of rainfall and local convective rainfall. And you remember that the scaling we did for extremes in terms of rainfall efficiency, vertical motion, and the thermodynamics or the saturation vapor pressure dependence on temperature, we said convective rainfall is important because there is a feedback between vertical motion associated with the heavy rainfall and dynamic feedback. So the differences in the convective rainfall would indicate that the higher resolution regional Earth system model potentially is also doing the extreme rainfall better. And of course there are also differences in the large scale or the stratiform rainfall here. So this is a kind of a short introduction to how various modeling issues, including extreme rainfall representation in models, can depend on multiple factors like resolution, as well as potentially representing the feedbacks via what we call Earth system configurations. Okay. I hope that makes sense. I just wanted to include it just to add these additional points. I will add a few more podcasts when the IPCC AR6 releases its regional chapters, chapter 10 and 11. They are released right now, but they are released with this big band across saying that this is not the final version, so the figures are not usable. But hopefully in a few weeks or a couple of months, the final version with clean figures will be released, and we will look at it when that gets released. Okay,